I've owned a Sony FX30 for 1 year at this point. I've used this on countless jobs from documentaries to commercials to feature films and even Emmy-winning TV shows. And let's talk about this camera a little bit. Here's my Sony FX30. I've shot so much content on this camera, it's kind of unbelievable. I've shot things like weddings, commercials, music videos, documentaries, and as of lately, I used it on an Emmy-winning TV show where we had 5 of these cameras paired with Sony FX6s as our main cameras, and on a feature film as our C camera, and doing things like gimbals and other run-and-gun setups. This camera has a lot of pros, and there are a few cons. So let's get into it. This camera shares the almost exact same body style as the Sony FX3, a camera that costs nearly double its price. And for like $1,800 for just the body only, and about $2,100 if you include this audio top handle, that's not a half bad price. Now, one thing that is a major complaint on YouTube is nothing bad for me at all. People are constantly complaining about this camera being Super 35, but if you actually look at the cameras in Hollywood, a lot of the major ones being used are still Super 35. Things like a lot of the Alexa cameras are actually Super 35. Their most recent camera that they put out, costing about $100,000 before you can even put a lens on it, is Super 35. Recent Red cameras like the Red Komodo and Komodo X are also Super 35. And some of the best camera lenses that are ever made are built for the Super 35 sensor. Full frame has been a recent addition to the camera market really within the last 5 years, and so lens manufacturers and camera manufacturers are still catching up to the full frame craze. So having a Super 35 camera in your arsenal can actually be really beneficial. Beyond that, having something with such a small size is really nice. It allows me to do something like I could never do with an FX6, such as rigging it in strange places. Doing top-down rigs from 10 feet above, it would be a lot larger of a stressor doing it with an FX6 than doing it with an FX30. It's a simple project here and a difficult one with the FX6. And being that the FX30 has a lot of the same features and all of the same codecs as the larger Sony FX line, it means you can seamlessly integrate it into a production without having any negatives. Take the Emmy-winning television show I was talking about earlier in the video. The main cameras on that show are FX6s, and in past seasons we've used things like GoPros as crash cameras and cameras we need to get into small places. Not this season, we upgraded for Sony FX30s as they were easily integrated into the lineup and the color profile of the rest of the cameras, giving it a higher production value. And because of the cheap price of these, we were able to easily do that with not having many fears of budget. We were able to get 5 of these on set. That's kind of ridiculous, but it was awesome to have that amount of cameras for when we needed it. I recently shot a documentary over the summer on this camera, and let's talk a little bit about the benefits of shooting it on something like this. Such a small form factor meant I was able to throw it in my backpack really easily, throw it in a small case, and go anywhere I really wanted with it. Not to mention the 2 XLR inputs was great since it was a solo shooter documentary. I was able to just mix on the fly and plug audio straight into the camera, meaning I had one less thing to worry about. This camera is really perfect, but there are a few downsides to it that I feel. And there's a few more reasons why I choose my FX6, which I'm filming this video on, more than I film on the FX30. Now, it all comes down to the type of production that I'm doing. If I have unlimited budget and unlimited resources, the flexibility of the camera doesn't really matter unless I need a few specific features. The main one being low light, and this is solved in the FX3 over the FX30, but the FX30's base native ISOs are 800 and 2500, meaning if you're going to shoot in low light, you need big light fixtures to be able to film, versus the FX3s and the FX6 are 800 and 12,800. They're low light beasts. And sometimes for me, working in documentary and often smaller end productions, I don't always have the capability to have unlimited lighting that I would need to work at 2500, meaning I sometimes choose my FX6 just for the reason of its base ISO. My other downside is nothing like full frame or it doesn't have enough button layout, but really for the fact that it doesn't have built-in NDs. Shooting documentaries on the FX6 with changing light where you're constantly working against the sun, it's so easy to be able to dial a button on the side and just get the ND and exposure you want. Instead of having to worry about screw-on NDs and things like that and always making sure you have the right step-up rings to work on this camera, it's nice just to have it in the camera. I feel like Sony really hit it out of the park on this camera, and I recommend this camera to a lot of people who are starting out and a lot of people who want a B, C, or D camera in their arsenal that's really small. it's great. And if you take this top handle off, this body is really nice. The last negative I'm going to say comes down to the body style. Now it's built where you have all the mounting points on it, where you could theoretically get away without a cage. However, there's one downside to this that I have where I kind of feel like I need a cage on it. And that's at the bottom of the camera, you only have one tie down point. And this comes to a problem where your tripod might start to screw off your camera over the day and you might have to go back in and retighten it. It sounds like a small nitpick, but it actually becomes a real big problem over the whole day, especially when you're rigging it out on a big set. You might have a lot of stuff rigged down to it. Things like rods, follow focus, batteries, and a lot of other stuff. You don't want it coming undone. So adding a cage really helps prevent that. I love that Sony gave the mounting options in camera for when you don't have options to put a big cage on it, but sometimes it is still necessary to get that cage. Now I'm about to go traveling to shoot a project, and I only can take one camera because I have to fly, and I'm not really sure if I'm going to be taking my FX6 or my FX30. There's pros and cons to both of them. However, since I'm traveling, I only get a limited amount of lighting that I can bring with me. And a lot of these budgets are so tight I can't rent lights, which really inclines me to go with the FX6 for its built-in native ISO of 12,800. This camera's not bad, and honestly, for a lot of reasons, I would prefer to go to this, mostly the size it would save in my bag to be able to put more lenses and other filmmaking equipment. However, because of the lack of the low light capability and no built-in NDs, it pushes me to go to my FX6 sometimes. By no means is this a bad camera, it just has some lack of features that you might want in the higher end of Sony's lineup. Both of my FX6 and my FX30 have room in my bag, and I take them out for separate jobs and for separate occasions. Not one is better than the other, and if you're looking into getting either of these cameras, I would really evaluate your work style and what one honestly sounds better. Are you okay to sacrifice on built-in NDs, lower ISO, and do you have the capability to do that? Or do you want to upgrade to something bigger to be able to know that you can always get more light just by raising your ISO and know that you can always have ND even if you forget it from your case? One is not better than the other, they just have different circumstances where you might need them in.